All right, we'll wait just a little bit longer. Um, and then we'll do some introductions, and I will give a brief overview of why we're all gathered here today, and then we'll dive into our first field form.
Hey, Cindy, good to see you after so long.
Thanks, Greg. Yeah, it's been a while since I've seen you.
Yeah, it sounds like you're a real head honcho now.
I don't know about that. Doing a lot of different things than I was before.
Great. Well, good.
Good to see you.
John, what are you hearing about the soil conference in Montrose? Are they sold out yet?
I am not involved in that conference the way I have been in the past, so I don't know. I'm giving 2 presentations there, but that's all I know.
Okay. You haven't heard anything anecdotally about it.
I have not.
Uh-huh.
That's such a great conference every
It's
year.
a really good conference.
Such a great conference. I think Lexi's going to try to go this year.
Oh, great.
Excellent. Are you going, Helen?
I want to. I have to see if I have travel plans though, but I really want to. So, I got to make that decision in the next little while. It's going to make me miss Ken Lipton though.
Right.
You coming back?
Ken?
I mean, I've been in touch with him. We text every once in a while. I don't know if he's coming back for the conference. So,
You got to come see your Western Slope friends.
There's some changes happening, quite a few changes happening there with that conference. And
All right.
Jerry Allen, who's been a big driver of all of that, is also no longer participating anymore.
did he finally retire?
He did, and he's had some health problems, so he had intended to be there, but he's not going to be. I don't think. Last I
It's
talked
too
to him.
bad.
Yeah. So it's kind of a changing of the guard there in general, and then they've combined with the Food and Farm Forum. All right. I was just quickly texting some of the other people who said they were going to be here who have not arrived, but we might as well go ahead and get started. As I said, I am recording this. We have a few folks who have indicated they want to participate in this process, including Roy Fallsgraf, who could not make it today or either of the follow-up meetings. And he has been so critical to the implementation of this program and process that we will probably try to reschedule the next 2 meetings. I sent out some dates. We'll probably try to move them a little bit. Also, the one on the 13th of December falls on this Boulder Soil Revolution conference. And so I wouldn't be able to make that one. So stay tuned. We'll try to shift around some dates and try to make it work for more people. I just want to say thank you to all the folks here and for your willingness to participate. I do want to go around and do some introductions. We couldn't get this done without everybody's input. So again, thanks for giving us your time. My name is John Miller. I am the Soil Health Program Manager for the Colorado Department of Agriculture. And I'll turn it over next to Emily. I'll just go around my screen here. And then after everyone does some introductions, I'm going to give us an overview of how the field forms have worked through the first 2 years or 18 months of them being utilized by people. and then kind of an overview of why we are doing this revision process and how it's played out. And then we'll go, as I said, we'll get into the first field form. So I'll turn it over to Emily.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emily Holleran. I've been working with John and the team to help facilitate these changes that we've been reviewing for the Colorado field forms and revisions and scoring sheets. Yeah. Nice to meet
Helen,
you.
great. Helen, how about you go next?
Helen Silver, I think I know everybody on this call, which is awesome. I'm just, with everybody's help here from before, helped navigate the first round of this process, and I just want to say we're super psyched to have Emily on board with this process as well.
Greg.
Greg Flaming. I live in Southwest Colorado, run my own little soil and water conservation consulting business, and also a farmer and rancher down here participating on the review board.
Christine.
Hey, can you guys hear me? Okay. I'm Christine Newton, a conservation agronomist with the USDA NRCS, and I kind of am the soil health contact with the NRCS. So we try to work together just to make sure the programs can complement each other.
Great. Lexi.
Hi, I'm Lexi Firth. I'm a soil scientist at Colorado State in the Department of Crop and Soil Sciences, and I work with Megan and Helen on our team called Enriches.
Cindy.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Cindy Lair, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Conservation Services Division, and been working with the STAR program and a lot of you for a lot of years. Good to see you again and work on this science team together. Patrick, you want to go?
Sure. Patrick O'Neill. I'm in Alamosa, Colorado. I work as a consultant to farmers and ranchers. I'm a soil scientist and agronomist. And yeah, John, I'll pass it back to you because I don't know what order your screen is in.
Awesome. Megan.
Hi, everyone. Megan Mockmuller. I'm a research scientist at Colorado State University and have been working with this team and all of you for quite some time. So good to see everyone. Sorry, Lynn.
Hi, good morning. Lynn Halliday. I am with the Routt County Conservation District on the board. Have been working with the STAR program for a few years now, and we were fortunate to be one of the pre-pilots here in Routt County. And so, yeah, happy to be here. Thanks.
Thank you. Amanda.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amanda Astor. I'm the Science and Research Director for the National STAR program. So the Colorado STAR work is happening sort of under the aegis of that national umbrella. So I've been participating in the field form and scoring sheet review and amendment process, and really just learning from that body of work and trying to figure out how to carry that over to the other states that are part of the program.
Great. And Perry.
Hey, sorry about that. Yeah, this is Perry Cabot. I'm with Colorado State University. I'm at the Agricultural Experiment Station. I'm also appointed to the Colorado Water Center.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. As I said, I'll give an overview here of how things have been going and why we're all here. So we had our first cohort of folks in the state incentives soil health incentive program. That they started filling out the field evaluations for the STAR field evaluations in 2022. The forms were available for folks in that program and the general public to fill out for about 18 months. During that time, we had 160-ish forms be filled out. So we then scored those forms. It was kind of a rolling process. We're revising that process. There'll be a certain scoring period of the year when we'll do all the scoring. But at the time, we just scored them as they came in. And it's safe to say we had a variety of outcomes. So some of the forms worked better than others. As all of you hopefully know, there's 11 different cropping systems and grazing lands that we are trying to evaluate here. And so there were forms that had technical issues where perhaps questions that were in the field evaluation were not in the scoring sheets or vice versa. One form in particular, our non-alfalfa haylands had a lot of those issues, which made it pretty much unscorable. So we had to return those to folks who had went through the process and say, sorry, we had a form error on these particular ones. There wasn't a huge amount of people that went through that form, so that was good. It was by far the one that had the most problems. But again, there's sort of a sliding scale here. There were some that just had a few problems like that, some that had none. In general, overall, I would say this forms performed very well. We had, I would say, I would call it a success. As we are able to look at some of these farms and ranches and compare it to their field evaluations and to the scores they received, they seem like they were lining up pretty well. However, as well as people filling out 160 of these, we scored 160 of them. So we got to see it on our end. And that process led us to seeing some things that could be refined even on the forms that performed well. For instance, there were discrepancies that made the scoring process more encumbering than it needed to be. There were some questions in certain cropping systems that maybe didn't need to be there at all, that as we're scoring, we'd go, and no one's ever choosing this for whatever reason, typically because it wasn't relevant to the cropping system being evaluated. So things like that popped up. So we decided to undertake this revision process and to really sharpen these forms up. And part of that has to do with the STAR expansion, the expansion of the STAR program, which I'll go into here in a moment. But just talking about the performance of the forms and changes that were made, I can give a couple pretty brief examples here before we get into the real meat and potatoes of this. But like our potato field form is one where you'll see quite a bit of changes. We were really we were very heavily weighting people's ability to do no-till. So we were like in our grain systems and things like that, we really hold no-till and soil reduction and disturbance of the soil very high in our weighting of points, because we think that's a very important principle towards soil health. However, in potato cropping systems, it's just not a scalable thing to have happen. During the time that the potato is being planted or harvested, there's just no way to do this in a no-till fashion on a large scale. So you'll see on that form that we changed the weighting system of the points to award people for how they treat the field in the season when the potato isn't there, because people are doing rotations on that crop, and on the off season we're awarding them for diversity, reduction in tillage, leaving stubble and residue in the field, having permanent ground cover, things like that. But during the potato season, we're not so much weighting we're not looking so much at their tillage practices. We're not looking so much at their residue retention, because residue retention in potatoes can lead to carryover of diseases and things like that. So you'll notice some pretty major changes there, and this is why. So that's, I guess, one example of what we've encountered as we're making these changes. Another thing that you will see on pretty much all of our forms is how we are handling livestock integration. So originally, as you all, again, all hopefully know, our livestock form is different. Our grazing lands form is different than our other cropping systems. Really, we're weighting people's management and monitoring decisions versus their specific practice-based decisions. But then on our cropping systems forms, when people had livestock integrated, we were asking specific practice questions and not management and monitoring questions. So each form in its livestock integration, in the livestock integration portion of it now, we don't say, do you remove the cattle when the ground is wet? We say, how do you monitor for compaction when the cattle are on the field? And do you have triggers to determine that you need to move them out of that field? So that's kind of, and that's, so you'll really see that on all of the cropping land systems. We changed from that specific practice question to management and monitoring to better fit in with our management and monitoring system for the grazing lands. It also seemed to make better sense to us because it, if you have your cattle home for the winter and you put them out on your cover crop field where after some corn or something, to graze that off, and then it rains or snows, people probably won't instantly go out there and move the cattle, but we do want to more just say, hey, are you monitoring what they're doing while they're out there and moving them accordingly? So that's a big change you'll see coming up. So now I'll turn to the National Star and what's happening there. National Star, due to influx of funds from Climate Smart Commodities Grant, has expanded greatly and has moved from what was Illinois Star when we partnered with them and began developing these forms, now to a much a larger entity that is moving to many more states, including to 5 more Western states, again, through the use of the Climate Smart Commodities grant funds. So the Colorado field forms will really be a base for regional forms or for those other Western states as they're developing their own forms. So again, we really want these to be meaningful and be capturing and evaluating what we're trying to evaluate as well as we can. We also have a pay for performance pilot plan that we're working on and partnering with some processors and commodity purchasers to potentially use these field evaluations to incentivize producer in performance. So the commodity purchasers will be paying sort of a premium if people can increase their star field evaluation ratings. So again, we really want these to just be as super accurate as possible and really capture the spirit of what we're trying to quantify here. So that,
Hey, John.
Yes, go ahead, Patrick.
On the pay for performance, is that change over a 3-year period, or if you've got a 4 or 5 star producer already, are they out?
That's a very good question, and there are multiple different models that will be occurring. So right now National Star is developing those models, and then we will be working with them to adapt them to our specific state. But will not be a one size fits all. So it's going to probably depend on the purchaser, or the commodity purchaser, or the group that's doing the pay for performance, on which model they choose. So there are multiple ways it could go. We just had really our first meeting on this about a week ago. And we're now going to be holding regular meetings as we talk about how that's going to look. So at this time, I can't tell you. I can just say we're working on it.
Okay, I'm certain that those who score high now would be happy to be
Rewarded.
in new markets to be rewarded for what they've already done. Yeah.
And I'm sure we will find ways to make sure they're rewarded. This is something that we are getting there's a lot of interest from the purchasers, the processors for this. So we again, we're pumping the brakes on getting them into participating, but we're pushing the gas on developing the pay for performance model so that we can get them in as soon as we possibly can. So
okay, and just one other quick question.
Yep.
Is there a document somewhere that CDA is referring to for here's how we think we'll use the star rating, or what it means to us or to the farmers participating?
We do have National Star is developing guidance on this, and again, with our input and partnership. At this point, I would say it's probably draft guidance, but they, again, with their expansion and their recent staffing up and their influx of funds, they have begin to work on this at a very fast pace. So I would say, again, it's draft now, but it's coming along quickly. So we decided to go through these and really fine tune them. We have our core group of folks who have been meeting, and so initially Emily went through all of these forms and the scoring sheets and compared them and showed where there were discrepancies, found all the discrepancies, and then we all get together and we go through each form line by line, look at every question being asked, look at the weighting and the points that are being awarded for practices and decision making, and then debate whether they are correct and how we can better improve question wording and things of that nature, or where questions might need to be removed or changed entirely to a different question to try to capture better what we were hoping to capture. It's been a fairly lengthy process, and we spend some we have been doing what we call retreats, which are the original one was 4 hours long. Now they have been 3-hour long meetings where we dive through these things. So we have put a lot of thought into all of this, obviously in anticipation of today, where we can get thoughts from the larger group about how well we are doing. We developed some criteria early on of how we will determine how we would make our decisions on this. So we determined that there are two kinds of changes, substantive changes and non-substantive changes. And the non-substantive changes we will present to you as FYI. You've hopefully looked at the differences between the forms on the one I sent out, the annual grasses, grains, and legumes. The substantive changes, we will seek your input. We'll explain what that substantive change was and ask you for your thoughts on it. And how we determined whether something was substantive versus not substantive was if a change has less than 50% point allocate, there's a less than 50% allocation of its allotted points in one single question, then we considered it to be non-substantive. So if a question was scored as being worth 2 points, and we said, no, this should only be worth 1 point, we considered that to be non-substantive. If a change is more than 50% in either direction for one single question, so if a change is worth 4 points and we say decided to make it worth 1 point, then we feel that is a trigger to be a substantive change. Non-substantive changes would be non-scored questions. So we have been removing as many non-scored questions as possible. There was a lot of them in the original forms. So we asked just things that we are now capturing in other ways, like in our incentives program enrollment forms, things like that. But they were things that were not being scored. So those have mostly all been removed out of the forms. There are probably compared to what was here before, there are very few now. If we totally removed a scored question, so gone altogether, no matter the point threshold, we are calling that substantive, and we will ask your opinion on that. If we totally add a point, again, no difference in point or totally add a question, again, no difference in point threshold, and then we will present that to you and ask for your input. Again, that's substantive. Also, if we reworded a question in such a way as to change the intent of that question, we consider that substantive, and we'll ask for approval. We will present it to you for your input. If we reworded a question and it did not change the intent, we just changed the wording, but it's still asking the same thing, we consider that to be non-substantive, and we'll give you an FYI. Also, if we combine questions, we consider that non-substantive as long as it doesn't break that 50% point threshold. So I hope that is about as clear as mud. But that is how we arrived at the document we're going to now go through. And Emily has done a really great job of doing a comparison between these, the originals and the new proposed forms. And now she's going to present that to us, and we'll go through them and look at all the changes. Do we have any questions before we get started? All right, Emily, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, John. Oh, can you enable screen sharing?
I can.
So I believe John shared all of these documents that I have open last week sometime. So my plan is to walk through those a little bit. I've highlighted some areas that we changed or modified, but I'll start with this summary of changes one pager. So this kind of summarizes what we've done. And again, the focus for this meeting is annual grasses, grains, and legumes. We've been reviewing all of the field forms and scoring sheets, and some, John mentioned the potatoes field form. There's more, I would say there's more substantial changes for that field form than perhaps this one, but this one, just to focus us, is on annual grasses, grains, and legumes only for now. In terms of the non-substantive changes, the kind of FYI, I did do comparison, a side-by-side comparison with the original scoring sheet and the original field form, and there were a lot of discrepancies, as John mentioned. So I won't share those original spreadsheets because there's a lot of different color codes that represented different things. But you can see that very clearly if you look at the new, look at those two first documents, the original field form compared to the original scoring sheet. There were several, I would say the majority of those discrepancies were around the options. So in some cases, for instance, I believe soil armor on the original, let me get this out of the way. On the original scoring sheet, some of the options on the field form weren't on the scoring sheet. So we added those options. So if they were on the field form and they weren't on the scoring sheet, we added those and talked about what kind of points should be allocated. And then I think on the example here, there was an instance where there was a question on the scoring sheet, but not on the field form. So we asked on the scoring sheet, the continual living root during the non-growing season, so the dormant season. That question was on the scoring sheet. It had points allocated, but it wasn't on the field form. So that question was added to the field form. I would say for this one, annual grasses, greens, and legumes, there's a lot of that. And that was, those are the majority of the non-substantial updates that we made. We've also been looking at the field form in Google Forms and trying to implement question logic. So some of the questions, again, not changing the intent of these questions, but really using question logic in that if, the example here is if you're dry land, you're not irrigated, then you skip the irrigated questions altogether. So there's a question at the very beginning that asks that, and then if it indicates that you're not irrigated, it skips those questions. So there's instances of that. There's also another example would be within the livestock integration piece. The first question is, do you integrate livestock with cover crops, etc., on this field? And if they say no, then they skip all of those livestock questions completely. So some question logic's built into the Google form now. We also modified some questions to help with, there's this discussion around, because John and team spent a lot of time manually scoring these the first round. So we're talking amongst ourselves on how we can automate this process going forward for the next round. So some of the question types, working with Lexi to see how we can automate that on the back end. Some of the question types have changed. So they used to be maybe select one, and now they're check boxes. So again, we're considering that non-substantial. We're just, because we're not changing the intent there, we're just trying to automate some of that scoring on the back end and make it easier on the team. Let me go through. Yeah. And of course, we also are looking at the scoring sheet. Ideally, we won't be looking at these scoring, or John and team won't look at these scoring sheets when the next round. Hopefully we'll be able to automate it some, but we are making it, if in case these do need to be used, and even for the automation process, making it easier to use. So we've made sure that, for instance, the general field information questions are consistent with the field form. So in the order that it's asked, before they were kind of jumping all over the place, making sure, in this instance, annual grasses, grains, and legumes, we do have various sections for dry land versus irrigated. So making that very clear. This was on 2 separate tabs before. We've combined them into 1 tab on the scoring sheet, and also making negative points stand out a little bit more. So again, if it comes down to manually scoring, we're hoping that this new scoring sheet will be a little bit easier to use. So I'd say all of those classify in terms of easy use, just trying to make these field forms and scoring sheets a little bit more user-friendly. In terms of more substantial changes, the first I think we could talk about is the definition of tillage types. So you'll see hopefully on the let's do tillage types first. You'll see hopefully on the original, or you've seen on the new field form that we sent out, we've greatly defined what we mean by tillage in the new. Before this was the extent of the definition provided on the field form. So we wanted to be, and the question here was, I think it was with some field cultivators. So I think that's where our discussion started to get a little bit, because field cultivators was in intensive tillage, and there was some discussion around some field cultivators aren't that intensive. So why not put it in reduced tillage? So it led to this bigger discussion of what does intensive tillage mean? What does reduced tillage mean? And so I did some research in this regard. It isn't, you know, there isn't one definition for these various tillage types, but kind of did a general summary of what I found within the research. I did look at specific equipment types, found that some field cultivators can only do 3 to 6 inches in depth, or less surface disturbance. But so we put field cultivators in both buckets, and or some field cultivators are both in intensive tillage and reduced tillage. Now, you're weighing up whether or not these other criteria are met when you're selecting this. So it led to this larger discussion around defining tillage. So we've done that in the field form document. I do want to say that we do plan to create a more detailed FAQ document to go along with this field form. There's several areas where we thought that maybe further defining what we mean by certain terms would be helpful. But this was an area that we decided that really should be right there as they're answering the questions. They can come back to these definitions and select the appropriate tillage type. So this was, I think, just not really changing the intent or anything. We still kept field cultivators in intensive tillage. We haven't changed most of the points in this regard. It's more just further defining those types. What we did do though with tillage is that you'll see in this question on the original form, it was this matrix, and we asked for 2 years of tillage types. The problem with this format was that it was not easily, it wouldn't be easily automatically scored on the back end. So again, we're kind of keeping this in mind. We really want to make scoring easier. And so we summarized, again, put each one of these into a bucket on the back end and the scoring sheet, whether it's intensive, reduced, etc. We're asking the producers to look at our definitions, select for each year. Then there's 4 questions where they select for each season which type of tillage they use. So this first, make this one question with a big matrix for 2 years has been changed to 4 questions and a more simplified, use our definitions and select which one based on those definitions. So I'd say those are pretty, again, not really changing the intent here, but significantly modifying how we're asking the question. I'll pause for a minute to see if there's any thoughts or questions on that before I move on. Okay. In terms of more terminology, again, not changing the intent, but there was questions around what living mulch was amongst the review team. So we simplified that term to companion crops. So throughout the document, and this is primarily with this question, the conservation practices question. So where there were companion crops before, we said living mulch. In the FAQ document, it is intended to define that companion crops are living mulch, depending on, the terminology someone might prefer. Relatively, I think, insignificant change there. I've talked about the FAQ document. So throughout the new form, we do mention an FAQ document that's being drafted. We're not complete. We're not done with that, but it's going to be all encompassing, I think, for all of the field forms. So we're keeping that in mind as we go through our review process. In terms of point updates, on this form, honestly, I don't think there were that many. So we, as the team, one of the very first things we noticed as a team was that perhaps soil armor should be weighed just as significantly as tillage was weighed. So originally, tillage was weighed at maximum 26 points. And soil armor as a section was a maximum of 23 points. So we increased that maximum eligible points for soil armor, thinking that it's just as important as tillage. This is not a greater than 50% threshold. We allocated those points primarily to crop residue, which you can see in this following bullet point that I'll go over in more detail. But increase that whole section to be able to earn at least or a maximum of 26 points. We did, yes, go ahead.
Just on that topic, or that point, to give emphasis to it, I heard a presentation by a longtime no-tiller from South America named Rolf Dirksch, who, in front of a crowd of several hundred no-tillers in the Northwest, or sorry, in North Dakota, said all of the attributes that we get from no-till, nearly all of them come from persistent cover, not from absence of tillage.
Yeah.
So just to emphasize, I think you're on the right track, and maybe tillage is overemphasized still.
Yeah. Very good point. And I would agree. Yeah, thank you for that, Patrick. That's really good to hear. And that's exactly where the team was thinking. And maybe we could think about this a little bit more as a team on crop specific. So for potatoes, for instance, on our root crops, we're significantly reducing, and we'll talk root crops next time we meet, but we're significantly reducing tillage in that area, the importance of tillage in that area. So yeah, maybe we could even, to your point, Patrick, revisit this for this one and see, should we up soil armor a bit more? I'll take a note of that. Thank you. So yeah, so where we increased points in soil armor was this residue options. So there was a little bit of inconsistency on the form. This is this next bullet here. Looking at annual grasses, grains, and legumes, they had these 5 buckets originally. So it was 70 to 100% was 5 points, 51 to 70%. This is residue retention on the field. It was 3 points. 31 to 50% was 2 points, 0 to 30% was -2 points. Looking at the other field forms and scoring sheets that go along with this annual crops field form, so that includes root crops, hemp, for example, they had a significantly more simplified buckets. So they had over 30% is 5 points, 1 to 30% is 2 points, and then 0% is -2 points. So there's a big inconsistency just with this annual grasses, grains, and legumes. Again, all the other field forms were in this second option, these more simplified buckets. So as a team, we didn't see the reasoning behind that. So we decided to change annual grasses, grains, and legumes to match those other field forms in terms of buckets. And we did modify the points a little bit, though. Mainly with this over 30%, we upped it to 7 points. Again, not a greater than 50% threshold change, but it's emphasizing that increasing the points in terms of soil armor. So increasing that section in total to be equal to tillage. So that was a significant change for this one specifically in terms of the eligible buckets. Any thoughts or questions on that point?
I think Christine in the chat was just highlighting that, and Christine jump in here, that tillage might also have additional impacts on the microbial community and carbon consumption. So I read that as as yes, that's why we should keep it as a separate principle. And I think NRCS does too. But Christine, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, it was mostly just for conversation. I was just, if you do have further conversations on, as you said, you might just talk about it some more, considering it in points. But I like how you did make it as important, because I agree with what Patrick did say. It was just more of a comment. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely tillage is a separate, section and very important. And originally it was ranked #1. So another thing we did during this review process was look at the scores for each soil health principle, and then how they were ranked in terms of relative weights. And originally tillage was ranked the highest, so it was worth the highest amount of points. And then soil armor followed. I think plant diversity was #3. So anyway, we looked at those rankings and kind of thought, where does this not make sense, or where could we maybe, drill down a little bit further into those point allocations? And that's where we came to the conclusion that soil armor at least is just as important as tillage. But yes, so definitely tillage is ranked high. I think the next after 26 points is plant diversity, and I think it's 18 points, just to give you some idea of how soil armor and tillage are ranked higher in those two than other areas, than other soil health principles.
I did have a question on the points for the cover. I'm trying to cross-check it with the new STAR field form questions. And I just had, like, when you go on the new form, does question 20, is that what corresponds to?
Yes.
So, okay, for question 20, like, how did you come up with those breaking points? Because it seems like they don't necessarily correlate with the breakdown of on the other form, I guess. And then also 0 to 29, that would be the same answer as 0.
Yeah, that should be 1 to 29. We have 1 to 29 here, but yeah, it should be made up. Definitely update that to 1 to 29. So to be honest, this came from and chime in group, but the other field forms. So the root field form, the root crops field form, and the hemp field forms, for instance, and the specialty row crops. They represent. This was the buckets. This was the this was the allocation that they represented. So it was the only one that was different was annual grasses, grains, and legumes, and we couldn't really figure out why that was the case. And so we just took the opportunity to just make it all consistent. So across all the field forms, root crops, hemp, etc., specialty row crops, and make this question consistent across all. So I don't know if there's historical relevance. I don't know, Helen, if you can remember that, or if team wants to jump in on why these. If I remember correctly, at least with our discussion, is that it's really difficult. You can see that the original buckets were a lot more specific. So 70 to 100%, 51 to 70%, 31 to 50%. And the thoughts amongst the group, from what I recall, is that it's really difficult for a farmer to actually measure that past 30%. So how do you know that you're 50% rather than 59%? So the thoughts were that this is a little bit too prescriptive, too specific, and the group kind of preferred how other field forms were handling it, which was this over 30, 1 to 30, and then 0.
Yep, I think you're right, Emily. That's exactly where we were thinking. We were trying to bring them into line. And we were looking at really more of almost an all or nothing type of approach, because it was very difficult for people to break it down into these other buckets accurately. So we're kind of like, did you take everything or till it under? Did you leave a little bit, or did you leave greater than 30%? So we're just sort of trying to simplify that, which I think is why it was like that on the other forms, and bring this one into line. But we're certainly open to hearing further thoughts on it.
Yeah, as I look at that number 20, or that question where you were showing the level of tillage remaining or residue remaining. I'm wondering if the way that is put in there, if that accurately gets to the question that John just articulated, because I like the way you articulated that, John. I just wonder if there is a different way to ask number 20. Or if everybody else says, no, I think it's fine, that's fine. But
And we've definitely had a lot of debate also on
okay.
the difference between 29% and 30%, right? This is a hard thing to determine where the line is, and what person's going to say I did 29% and not 30. And it was sort of happening with those other buckets just on a grander scale. We were also penalizing people for 0 to 30% on the other buckets. We were giving them a -2 points on this form for leaving 30% of their residue, and that just didn't seem right either. So I think now we only penalize at 0, correct, Emily?
Yes, only
Yep.
if it's 0.
I guess I was thinking back on the way you were asking the question, how they treat it. Are you working it back in the soil? Are you leaving it? Are you removing it? Those.
Yeah.
I think the way we have number 20, I guess it gets to it how much is retained on the field after harvest. I mean, ultimately, that gets there. Okay.
And Christina's saying, and the fact that if someone says they keep 1%, they get 2 points, but at 0%, they get -2.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's kinda
maybe
weird.
it is an all or nothing, or like, 0 is dinged, and then up to 50% is a lower amount, and then anything above is the higher. I don't know. This is something we definitely debated a lot.
Beginning to Cindy's comment, maybe it's not using percentages, but using like how you summarized it, John. Are you working it in? Are you
How are they
That's
treating
it.
the residue?
Practice. Yeah.
practice rather than percentage measurement? Yeah.
We also debated quite a bit how accurately people generally could estimate the percentage. I mean, we really went through this, and I want to give people credit, but and many people I'm sure could accurately estimate it, but there's probably a percentage that aren't. They're going to look at this and go, I don't know. I mean,
Should we take this? Any other thoughts? We can take this as a thought. That's something to discuss amongst the team next time we meet.
yeah,
Revisit.
I think we could talk about it more and see if we can come up with a better solution.
Yeah.
It does, in hindsight, look wonky, and they all look like this now. So I really do like the idea of maybe asking people how they are treating the residue versus the percent. The percent has just never really sat well.
Or maybe it can incorporate like bigger, like a bucket of like a percent. I think the amount that's retained is important, but like maybe we can classify it in multiple ways, right? Like how are they treating it and how much is being retained, but putting less emphasis on the exact percentage. Perry, do you have a thought?
Yeah, I guess, is there a reason why you couldn't just have them do the standard 100-foot transect thing?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to make, obviously some people are, but a lot of people probably don't. And we're really, these are supposed to be as unencumbering, so they should take, 10 to 15 minutes. I mean, I think it's a good practice to encourage people to do that, but
My producers would laugh at me if I asked them to go out
Yeah.
and do 100-foot transect.
So it's probably a trade-off between our scientific accuracy on getting the percentage and keeping it as unencumbering as we can to get our.
Maybe that's a good thing to add to the FAQ document, though.
I definitely think the FAQ document should have guidelines on how to do the estimates.
Yeah.
And to Perry's point, I wonder if it's possible for us to incorporate some of these more detailed assessments in the verification process. Maybe when somebody goes out to verify, granted, residue changes at different times of the year with different practices and cropping going on, but as we develop our criteria for verification, I think we need to look at timing and things like that, so that it's not 10 months later than when somebody filled out the form. But I wonder if having that verification with the transect, looking at it more critically, would be useful for our scientific side of it.
I would say that from the get-go, many of us have advocated that the form is a recollection or a self-reporting. And if we can figure out how to make the form or what's contained in the form useful for incentivizing or sparking interest in the farmers for monitoring themselves, then we've done something good. But strictly filling out the form in and of itself is not something done well or done good. I think how we use it going forward is critical, and how we connect with the technical service providers or technical assistance providers so that they can be part of that educational process, and that encouragement, I think, is also critical.
I agree with that, Patrick, and I think just raising the importance of residue and residue management is a starting point with these guys. Getting into transects is, we're not there yet with a lot of my producers anyway.
We're working towards a web app that they will be filling out, and I don't know if this is possible, but having different pictures of what levels of residue look like on the ground.
Oh, I really like that.
Because when I go to the grocery store and I'm doing my self checkout and I'm putting my asparagus on there, you look at pictures to see what your veggie is there, and it makes it so easy to go through and say, yeah, that's kind of looking like what I got here, and it may be something useful for making it easy for the producer, but yet also resembling what it actually is out there.
NRCS used to have a handout that had photos of 0 to 25 or 30. Maybe Christine can chime in. I don't know if they still have those in their offices.
And even if we couldn't put it in this particular form, it could be in the supporting document, the FAQ definition of terms document. Because we're hoping to have links right in these questions so they can click click here for help estimating.
Info button.
Yeah. Click here for
And
further
Christine did
information on
put a great resource, the ocular crop residue pictures that I think you're referring to, Greg, in the chat there. And then I also put the awesome field guide that Lexi had put together that includes those similar photos under the soil cover section. So maybe we can include something like this in there as well to help. And I was looking
definitely
through
hoping to use that field guide, the field assessment guide, as a tool for people going through this.
I think, did Katie have a question?
Yeah, Katie had her hand raised. Thanks.
Sorry, I'm on my my phone and I was stuck in the chat. I was just going to mention that there are apps that can be used on smartphones for residue cover calculations, and pretty much everybody has a smartphone these days, so that could be another option too. And then just using like the for like rangeland management, a lot of times it's just, you know, like that like square foot measurement with either a hoop or like a PVC square.
Mhm.
So that could be something that some of the field folks could provide for producers to be able to use that and make it really simple.
Mhm.
I think those are great suggestions.
Mhm.
I just want to flag that I think we're probably going to be circling back to this very question when we talk about tillage as well, because of the definition of tillage that we have. So
When so we can revisit, I spoke about the definitions of tillage a minute ago, but I don't know if you had something to add to
no,
that.
just that for our own purposes,
Oh.
and something to stick in our head, we need to make sure that we're consistent.
Mm-hmm.
Great. We will talk about this, and next time we meet up, we'll present some solutions and get everyone's thoughts.
Mhm.
Great feedback though.
Yes, definitely good feedback and good ideas.
Mhm.
The next area, this did indicate or result in a greater than 50% change in point threshold. But there's a question on the field form which asked for no-till duration. And originally 1 to 2 years of no-till was 0 points. And we just didn't, ultimately think that was fair. So we increased that from 0 points, 1 to 2 years of no-till to 2 points. Yeah, if there's any strong objection, but we kind of thought that maybe this was just an oversight originally. We couldn't think of why you wouldn't award some points for any duration of no-till. In terms of section revisions, I already reviewed this. This was the tillage method question. So originally it was this matrix. We've simplified this and created 4 new questions. So I've reviewed those questions already. The next major section change, which John alluded to in his introduction, was the livestock integration section. So again, this is an area where the original questions were very specific. So getting to these same challenges that we're talking about with crop residue, it was another area where we were asking very specific percentage type questions. And again, the discussion was similar to the crop residue discussion. We're not sure how accurate, farmers could estimate these things. How do you know if you're 30% versus 35, et cetera. So what we did there in that section was essentially make it more practice-based. So John mentioned this as well. So you'll see we're asking them, do you have contingency plans? Do you assess compaction before and after? Do you have plans or, an idea of how you're going to assess that? So do you document or do you take measurements, et cetera, of that compaction? So these questions expanded a little bit just to encompass, take it from these percentage, very specific questions to more practice-based questions. I think we added 1 or 2 to be able to capture all of them. I think the intent is still covered. So we talk about bare ground, compaction, etc. The intent is still there. We just asking it in a more practice-based way rather than measurement way.
And I think, and again, this is going to be a change to all of the forms. So these questions, we completely changed how we were asking the livestock integration for all the cropping forms and changed it to this method. So these might be really worth looking over as we prepare to look at the other forms coming up as well. And I think it really does a better job of capturing what we were, what our original intent was.
So we can go through a little bit more detail maybe to that point, John, in terms of the questions themselves. So we start with asking if they have any contingency plans. The idea here, it can be written or unwritten. It just, you have a plan. We're not specifying how that plan is recorded in extreme events. So drought, flooding, pest, etc. We then ask, do you assess compaction? Assess can be very, we have a few examples here using a shovel, visual observation, more specific or more accurate type of assessment. We're being very flexible in that regard, but do you assess it in some way, compaction before, during, and after? So they need to answer yes to all 3 of those, before, during, and after the livestock grazing event. If you answer yes, we ask a little bit more detailed questions. How are you documenting, or do you document measurements of your assessment? And they get a little bit more points if they do document them versus, just a visual observation. The next set of questions is similar to the compaction, except we're looking at bare ground. So do you assess bare grounds before, during, and after the grazing event? And then again, we provide some examples of how you can assess this. And then the same sort of question. If you said yes to that, do you have a more formal documentation or measurement of that assessment? And then you get a few extra points. And then the last set of questions, again, similar to the previous 2, but this is looking at utilization and residue. So are you assessing corn stubble, for instance, before, during, and after? So making sure they're not over grazing that field. And if yes, do you document that or measure that in a more specific way? So 3 areas asked in a very similar manner. And if you have more formal system in place in terms of measurement and documentation, you get more points.
Just a question on that. So if that doesn't really correlate to how much residue is left out there, or how much fairground is out there, it's just that they're assessing it.
Right. Originally,
that's
how much? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Okay. So they could be saying, yeah, I assess it, but there's 0.
Yes. I mean, I guess maybe a question like, do you like after the assessment, like, do you use the assessment to make management decisions on how much residue will be left or something like that? I mean, I see what you're saying. I guess our worry again, there's probably 2 ways people could implement livestock, say on a cover crop in a cornfield. One where they're just putting them out there and then eventually it's all gone and they're maybe even feeding there for the rest of the winter or something, and then one where they're doing assessment and then making decisions based off of it to moving them once they get to a certain point. So maybe we need to add a question about what they're using the assessment for.
Yeah, we had a discussion around this. I just don't remember, but yeah. Do you take any action on your assessment if the assessment is, yeah. Is someone going to say something?
Because yeah, I mean, that's a good point. They could say, yeah, I assess it and let them turn it into a dry lot. I mean, I assess the compaction too. I look at it with the shovel and go, man, it's sure getting compacted.
We so this was really informed by the grazing land forms, and we have a similar question on the grazing land forms about monitoring, how you monitor. And we do have a question about, does the results of that inform your management? I could be totally wrong, but John, Megan, Emily, Greg, this might ring a bell, that in some ways we felt like perhaps farmers who are bringing cows in for only a limited period of time might be more limited in their ability to change the management that year. That does not mean we couldn't phrase a question about having management changes for the next year. We could phrase it pretty broadly. But my recollection is we wanted to be sensitive to the limitations that a farmer was having if they didn't control the livestock.
I think that's a great
I think you're right on, Helen. And farmer and rancher are two distinct things. Oftentimes they aren't the farmer's cows and they're not managing them, the rancher is. And so we were looking at it, I think, in a more macro level, but hoping it would affect their management going forward if they had negative impacts from the grazing.
And we had our original question was like, if you have a rain event, do you move the cattle? And again, we were like, if these people are farmers on this particular farm, and there might not even be their cattle, is that feasible? And penalizing it, is it pushing people away from that practice?
Exactly. And the other piece, John, to tack onto that is that down here, a lot of these guys just pull a wire around an entire pivot, and there isn't outside the wire is free range, so moving the cattle is not an easy do either, to move 130 acre perimeter wire fence.
So yeah, I think Helen saying is spot on. We are trying to, and maybe you need to reword, but we're trying to get to the point of just encouraging them to check and see what's happening after the cattle have maybe been there for the specific fall or grazing period, and then maybe adjust accordingly in the future.
Yeah, I think we also talked about giving them the benefit of the doubt. So if they're taking the effort to have plans and to monitor these things, then they are likely going to act on them. So it wasn't like, if someone has it in mind to monitor these things, then why else would they be monitoring them if they weren't going to take action? So I think we also had a discussion around giving some leeway and the producers some benefit of the doubt too, if I recall.
All that being said, I can flag it for us to revisit that we could have a very broad question about some sort of management change, even if it's the next year based on monitoring.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Like, do you intend, based off of your monitoring, do you intend to alter grazing plans for your next cycle or something?
Exactly. And that
Yeah.
was feedback I think I probably shared in our discussion around this, was that one of my growers had compaction issues behind the cattle and said, yeah, my change is that I won't have the cows back, you know.
Find another farmer or another rancher.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We'll definitely work on some wording here and see if we can hone these questions up some.
Yep.
And again, these will be pretty standard across all the annual or the cropping system questions. So, or question evaluations. So we'll have in the next meeting, we can revisit this and maybe propose some alternative wording.
I've got a question. I'm sure this is somewhere, but what's the total points that could be scored upon, I guess? My question is, if a producer is not incorporating livestock, would there ever be a chance for them to be a 5-star?
Yes.
Okay.
We have been painstakingly aware of this, and we want people to have multiple paths to being 5-star. So if they choose not to have livestock integration, that's great, but and that is why there is quite a bit more possible points than what it takes to become 5-star, because there's different paths to get there. And it's also why some areas of the scoring sheet will have maximum points that you can get in that spot, so that they're not totally overweighing other areas. But it is definitely, I mean, this is a very difficult thing that we're doing, trying to assess soil health practices across every type of cropping system and landscape in Colorado. And we're aware, I mean, there's people who don't have water, and we want them to be able to have a 5-star for their specific area. So those people can't plant cover crops. I mean, they just physically can't. So we're doing our best to weight these things and look at them in such a way as to give people multiple ways to get to, doing the best they can in their spot, in their situation.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
The last thing, this is fairly minor, so we could maybe take any final comments, but we did remove one question. And this is around, it was a question, if you choose either multi-species cover crop living mulches after the conservation practice question that I showed earlier, please describe your crop type mix. And the reason why we removed this is because it's captured elsewhere. So there are two other questions that get to the intent. Question 43 asks specifically, what is your cover crop mix? Explain your cover crop mix. So we just removed that question because there was some redundancy there. But we wanted to flag that as it was a question removal. It was a non-scored question removal, though. It wasn't scored. It was an open text response box. But that kind of captures it all for annual grasses, grains, and legumes. I think we have some takeaways from you guys, great thoughts and ideas that we'll talk about next during our next 3-hour long retreat. But yeah, any closing thoughts? John, did you want to?
I'm glad to hear closing thoughts from the group. But I did miss in the beginning. So we had that first cohort of 160 folks utilizing the field forms. Our incentives program has expanded pretty greatly as well. We're right in the enrollment period for 320 more people, and they will be using these forms. They'll be our guinea pigs on the new forms, starting probably sometime around April of this year. So that's kind of our timeline coming up for this, for these forms to get their next round of stress testing. We also hope to expand the use of the forms outside of the incentives program. So folks just filling out the forms to find out where they're at on their soil health journey. And as I said, maybe participate in pay for performance, and things like that. So the work we're doing now we hope to have many hundreds of people go through these forms, by this time next year. So that's just something to keep in mind. And any group, before we wrap up and can stay conscious of time here.
I just want to do a shout out to all of you that have been in this so long and helping to get this. We're always looking at a finish line, but there's never a finish line. We're always working on it and making it better and learning how we can improve on it. And so this is so important. And I just can't thank all of you enough for the time you spend on developing these questions and trying to make it easier for the producers to do the right thing. And thanks for what you've done today, in the past, and what we continue to do. So this is great.
Yeah, and this is invaluable for us. So your feedback today has, I think it's found the spots where we need to work on things. So this is exactly what we're hoping for. Feel free to email me if you think of things between now and our next meeting. I will work on setting up a time for that meeting and get it out to folks. We'll hopefully meet again before Christmas, before the holidays, but we don't want to get too close to the holidays because it gets rough for people. But I'll reach out with some dates, and hopefully we can all get together again. And again, yeah, in between now and then, feel free to email me with your thoughts, and I can take them to our core team as we're looking at these things. So much thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Good to see you
Have
all.
a great day.
Everyone.
Holidays too.
And happy holidays if we don't see you before.